I'm telling you to leave, you woman who can only give birth to girls. Next, they told me to help out. And because of that, each time I visited their house, they treated me worse and worse. Every visit, I felt like a little maid, having to listen to the in-laws boast about the old days or complain about their struggles for what felt like hours. And then they'd end up meddling in our private life, pressuring us to quickly produce a male heir. Even my husband, who said he wanted kids, would say things like, "Of course, I'd prefer a boy. Actually, if it's not a boy, there's no point in having one." But when I was pregnant, all they cared about was the baby's gender. When they found out our first child was a girl, they insulted me and said things like, "Well, there's a saying, first a girl, then a boy. She'll be handy to have around." When the second and third turned out to be girls too, the in-laws openly lost interest in them. They'd just keep saying, "Next time, make sure it's a boy. Why is this house such a mess?" There's no rowdy boys running around, and still, you use being busy as an excuse. Can't you even clean properly? Maybe it's your laziness that's why you can't have a boy. Watch all these girls, and all they'll do is get married off elsewhere. It can't be successors. You should be taking care of us, the heads of the family, instead of wasting time on girls who are no use as heirs. But to think, these are their own grandkids they're talking about. I never invited them in the first place, and I sure as heck don't want to go to their place. Being dragged to their house and treated like this is more than I can stand. I've told Jake countless times that I want to keep our distance from his parents, but it's like talking to a wall. The house being a mess is a fact. Girls are supposed to play quietly and read books, right? Instead, they just scatter their stuff everywhere. If you can't manage housework and childcare, which are supposed to be a woman's job, then it's no wonder you're being criticized. How can you say that when we're both working to raise our 2 kids? It's impossible for housework and childcare to be only my responsibility. If working is your excuse, then just quit and be a stay-at-home mom. If you can't do that, then what my mother's saying is right. You think you can support me and our 3 daughters on your salary alone. That's why I'm working too. It gives me a headache just thinking about it. Sure, there was a time when men worked and women took care of the home and kids. But those days are long gone. Now it's normal for wives to work too. But to accept the changing times while still insisting that housework and childcare are solely a wife's responsibilities is just too convenient. No matter how much I tried to convince him, Jake just won't change. My mom's right. Every time I heard these words, thoughts of divorce crossed my mind. But my daughters, oblivious to everything, were fond of Jake. But only the eldest, a middle schooler, seemed to have some reservations about Jake. Kristen being in the throes of adolescence, she didn't seem to be very interactive with Jake. Yet, whenever I saw the 3rd girl innocently laughing and clamoring to be held by Jake, calling him daddy, I couldn't bring myself to go through with a divorce. 3 months had passed since then. For some reason, Jake started coming home late more frequently. I was suspicious and asked him when he returned home. "Jake, you've been quite late recently. Is something up at work?" "No, it just happened today."
You messed up, and I had to cover some overtime.
"Don't worry about it. At first, I believed his words, but he began to come home late more often, and I asked again.
Your teams. Then Jake started making excuses like he was held up at work entertaining clients, or meetings with partners ran long.
Even as I started to suspect Jake's words and actions, I couldn't muster the courage to take that step away because I didn't want to deprive my children of their beloved father. I started to pretend not to care about Jake's late returns. Half a year had gone by in this way. A colleague I worked with mentioned seeing Jake walking in the downtown area with a young woman. I dismissed it to her, saying Jake was at work, but she insisted she wasn't mistaken. Our families are close, often going camping or having barbecues together on holidays, and my daughters are around the same age as hers. Jake and she always got along well whenever they met. So I knew she couldn't have mistaken someone else for Jake. But even knowing this, my desire to trust Jake was stronger, and her suggestion to approach him next time made my heart skip a beat. I told her I'd talk to Jake about it, hoping it was just a misunderstanding. I went to see a private investigator immediately after work and requested a surveillance operation. 5 days later, the investigator got back to me, saying it had been quite straightforward. When I met the investigator after work, I was presented with substantial evidence. There were several photos of Jake entering a hotel with another woman, and the results were incriminating. I decided to confront Jake about the affair as soon as I got home. It was perfect to Sisson, though he had gotten home before me. He was just looking at his phone in the living room. I saw my eldest daughter take her younger sisters to her room. Jake, can you explain this to me? You said you were working overtime or entertaining, but is entertaining clients at a hotel part of the job? Jake didn't respond to my words and just started making a phone call with a cold expression. For some reason, Jake remained silent, determined not to speak. So your silence means you admit it's true. It's none of your business. You really think a husband's affair is none of his wife's business. It's none of your business. No matter how many times I asked, Jake only repeated that it was none of my business. Then, suddenly, the doorbell rang. While I was thinking of pretending we weren't home, Jake quickly went to open the door. In came my in-laws and the woman from the investigator's photos. What's going on? Did you call them here? I hadn't planned on telling the truth until everyone arrived. Well, now that everyone's here, explain these photos. I challenged Jake again with the photos. The girl there's pregnant with a boy. Our family has always needed a son to carry on the family line. I told you before we got married that we needed a son, but you kept having girls. So you're no longer needed and should leave right away. Just when I thought Jake was starting to make sense, he handed me a divorce paper with an explanation that didn't make any sense. Hold on, pregnant. How many affairs do you need to have for that to happen? Sure, I knew about the son issue, but we can't choose the gender of our babies. Besides, you always seem to love our daughters. Susan, you've heard the story, but you're someone who could only have girls. Just leave this house quietly. I'm sorry, but I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to my husband, Jake. What's going on? At my words, my husband lets out a heavy sigh. Enough already. There's no need to discuss this. All Susan has to do is leave this house quietly. What are you saying? We have 3 daughters. That's none of my business. You're the one who wanted to have 3 girls. Just get out already. Don't be ridiculous. What do you mean wanted? You used to dote on all 3 of them too, didn't you, Jake? Why would you say something like this all of a sudden? I thought my husband would say something in response to my words, but it was his mistress who retorted.
Oh, this is why dealing with an older woman's such a hassle?
When you're told to leave, you should just leave gracefully. What are you even doing here? It's because of you showing up that our family is in this mess. Miss, don't you mean it's your fault for not being able to have a boy? Everything went through a lawyer, which cost money but was worth it to avoid the stress. The lawyer's visit to my in-laws to discuss alimony and child support was met with their silent bitterness, like they were swallowing a bitter pill. Nevertheless, my husband had an affair and even got another woman pregnant, which looked bad to outsiders. And to prevent more complications, both my husband and my in-laws hastily gathered the funds for payment, which seemed to even cover the mistress's portion of the alimony. After another 3 months went by, while we couldn't afford luxuries, my parents had supported us, and the 6 of us had been able to start living a peaceful life together. I was just beginning to get used to life without my husband, as were our daughters. Because on his day off, my husband suddenly called me. When I ignored him, the phone kept ringing over and over. I thought it would be trouble if it kept ringing until our daughters returned from their lessons, so I reluctantly decided to answer my husband's call. Good you finally picked up. What do you want all of a sudden?
Well, you see, the woman I cheated with, just gave birth.
What am I supposed to say to that?
Edison, the legs, the crotch.
According to my husband, the child that his mistress had given birth to was a girl. Moreover, it wasn't a case of a mix-up during the ultrasound. The doctors had said it was a girl from the start. The mistress had lied about the baby's sex because she wanted to marry my husband, who apparently would have considered divorce if it weren't a boy, but his parents put a stop to that. They were worried about not having any grandchildren if things continued as they were, so my husband called off the divorce. He was supposed to be thinking about having another child right away, but his life was in shambles and he couldn't focus on that. Right after the birth, she couldn't work and had no income. She'd refused to do housework perfectly because of child rearing, and she flatly denied doing any caregiving for my in-laws. It's tough to take care of household chores perfectly when you're desperate with a baby and you don't have the physical strength or spare energy to take care of elderly parents. Yet, living with this new wife, my husband now told me he was thinking of divorce again. So, what do you want me to do about it? I responded coldly, and my husband said, "Susan, please, can't we start over?" As if I have any intention of getting back together with you now, I lashed out at him. Don't talk like that, despite having thorns like a rose. You're delicate and bloom beautifully, aren't you? I love that about you, Susan. Let's give it another try. My husband was trying to hold back his tears when he said that. He was trying to hold me back with his poetic words. Those words gave me chills. Susan, are you listening? We've been together for a long time. Your feelings haven't changed just because we've been apart for a bit, have they? Perhaps I would have been moved by my husband's words of love if this were Bet. When we were married, but after discovering his affair and getting a divorce, all I could feel was coldness. I just gave a bitter smile. My husband happily misunderstood. You're totally clueless. That was a bitter smile. I'm not laughing, and I haven't forgiven you. Why do you have to say that? Susan, please consider getting back together. Haven't we always been doing well? You were happy with me, weren't you? We were not doing well. That's why we fought so many times. I wasn't happy. That's why I divorced you. It was you who said you didn't need me. That's true, right? Then we can start over. It was me who suggested we break up, so I'm suggesting we start over. Let's do it. My husband started spouting nonsense about wanting to reconcile. He even brought up old times, and honestly, I was fed up. But then a thought struck me, and I changed the subject. Oh, about Kate. Why do you know her name? She didn't introduce herself that time, did she? My husband sounded surprised when I mentioned the name of my remarriage partner. Of course I know. I'd heard it from the detective, and I even sent a certified mail for the alimony claim. And about her. What about Kate? I was just wondering who she might be targeting next. She has a hobby of breaking up seemingly happy couples or married people, and since you and I are divorced, I was wondering who the next target is. My husband said nothing. Perhaps he was speechless, mouth agape. I proceeded to explain to my unresponsive husband what I knew about this woman named Kate. Kate had always been adorable since she was a child, always surrounded by various people. Her father, the company president, doted on her and she was spoiled, always getting what she wanted. It's precisely because she could get anything she wanted that taking things from others became her hobby. As an adult, her targets became other people's boyfriends, fiancés, and husbands. Since taking things was her hobby, she would easily discard them once she managed to start a relationship. When I introduced her dating history, investigated by a detective, to Jake, he gasped in a strangled voice. What the heck? Why bring this up now? If you told me this when we were getting divorced, I wouldn't be in this mess. Back then, all you said was, I doubt it. You never listened to my side of the story, so I did as I was told and left. It's not like a woman who approaches a married man can be considered good-hearted. Don't talk like that, Susan. It's so sneaky of you, making it sound like it's my fault. If you had just explained things properly back then, it would have been different. Jake, for some reason, started to speak in a defeated tone, playing the victim when he spoke to me. Angered by his words, I snapped at him. What are you on about? You're the one in the wrong, not like you are wrong. Why don't you just live however you want? I don't care anymore. At my words, Jake suddenly spoke in a softer tone. Susan, it's going to be tough raising 3 daughters, all by yourself. Let me take at least one of them. If you let me take one, you'll have an easier time. Aren't 2 kids enough? Like the cloying sweetness in his voice was so vile. It made my head spin. What in the world does he think of our daughters? I could never send them to live with such a man. Neither Jake nor his parents really want the girls because they love them. He kept saying any girl would do, or just one, talking about them as if they weren't people. I could only see a future where they would be preyed upon by Jake and his parents, and I knew that as they grew up, they would receive the same terrible treatment I did. That's why I refused adamantly. Don't be ridiculous. I will raise my daughters properly. Don't be like that. And a child needs her father, don't you think? Dick argued defiantly. A father who can't even raise his kids properly, let alone cheats, has no right to custody. I spoke firmly to leave no room for misunderstanding. If Evan's so, it's up to the girls to decide if they want a father like that. They're too young to decide for themselves now, so I'll take responsibility and raise them. Enraged, I conveyed my feelings and hung up the phone on Jake. I don't know if it was because I immediately blocked his number, but I never heard from him again. Months went by. It seems Jake and Kate's divorce went through without a hitch. Kate went back home with her newborn child. Apparently, the child's father is also married, and she's being sued for alimony not just by Jake but also by his actual wife. Up for cash, she seems to be working hard at raising her child with the support of her parents back home. Terrifyingly, she shows no signs of remorse. She is aware that what she's doing is wrong, and if caught, she pays alimony as a sign of her sincerity. However, it seems that the money is also being provided by her father, who is a company president, allowing her to live a carefree life. It appears that the reason Kate went after my husband was just a whim. With her natural beauty and status, she would freely take other women's boyfriends and married men. She decided to target married men as her next conquest. It just so happened that Kate set her sights on Jake and me when she saw us in town. It was a complete nuisance to have our lives disrupted by her caprice. The reason Kate decided to marry Jake, something she usually didn't bother with after taking a man, was because Jake was indecisive and indulgent towards her. It seems Kate wanted a man who would treat her like a princess, indulging her every whim and buying her whatever she desired. Now, I couldn't care less about it all. I was stunned by the sheer audacity of not just my easily swayed husband, but also Kate, the woman he cheated with. Jake was stunned by the sheer audacity of not just my early swayed husband, but also Kate, the woman he cheated with. Jake was deceived by his affair partner, but he had the chance to refuse and didn't take the bait. No matter what stories I hear, the fact that Jake betrayed me won't just disappear. I also heard that Jake's family was ostracized by friends and relatives and had moved far away. They only stormed into my house once after the move. Susan, stop being stubborn and hand over one of the kids. That's right, Susan. It's not good for a child to receive all the love from just one parent. We'll raise her together, the three of us. Please stop. I'm fine raising her on my own. Thinking that my youngest daughter, who is still too young to understand, would be okay, the three of them came with a menacing look to take her away, and I resisted desperately. You can't handle it, Susan. You can't raise her while working. Hand her over, Susan. Poor thing. Don't worry. We'll raise her properly. But no matter what I said, they wouldn't listen. Stop. Don't take her. This is kidnapping. My youngest daughter cried loudly, and I screamed just as loudly. Thanks to our cries, the nearby residents gathered and quickly restrained the three of them. After a while, the police arrived from a call and took the three away. So I repeatedly thanked my neighbors, relieved that my daughter was safe. Later, the three of them received a restraining order. But I'm considering moving, because a restraining order isn't enough to make me feel safe. Since they know where we live, it wouldn't be strange for them to show up at any time. I've discussed moving with my parents, who live with us, because I feel sorry for them too. They said they'd dispose of the house and move with us, as it would be a nuisance to be followed forever. Still, I feel guilty for changing my daughter's environment so often. Yet seeing their smiling faces and healthy growth heals me. I've decided to move to a new place to protect them. Just before moving, I got a call from an unregistered number. I think it was the moving company or someone from the city office. I answered, only to find it was surprisingly Kate. Summing up her sobbing story, she had apparently gotten into trouble for being with too many men and had contracted a serious disease. She needed money for treatment, so she cried and asked for me to give back the alimony, but I responded coldly. Don't you have a wonderful dad who buys you everything? There's nothing I need to do for you. Her audacity was too much, and without much of a response, I just hung up. I immediately blocked her and bought a new cell phone, so now she can't reach me anymore. I'm grateful to my parents for coming with me, and I'm determined to keep working hard for my daughter's healthy upbringing. This is today's dinner. Pizza and hamburgers are good, right? What's this? At frozen food again? We've been having frozen food a lot lately. Don't you think it's disrespectful to a man who's been working all day? I'm sorry. I'm just nearing my due date and it's really tough. I had to do enough already. You really don't lift a finger, do you? It must be nice living like that. True, lately, because of my late pregnancy, we've had a lot of frozen meals. But why do I alone have to struggle and push through when my husband doesn't help at all? Not just with meals, but with like chores too. He's so mad. I thought to myself, trying to smoothly change the topic. Okay, I forgot to get the mail from the mailbox. Can you grab it for me? And then in the next moment, I heard the distinct click of the front door locking behind me. Hey, what's the big idea? You take people for granted too much. Intology, if you love frozen food so much, why don't you freeze outside? I didn't have my phone with me. How could I spend all night outside in below freezing temperatures? As I started to panic, a man approached from behind. Just when I explained my situation to him, I'm a 31-year-old stay-at-home wife. My husband and I got married 3 years ago, and we're still just the two of us living together. My husband, who works at a small business, and I, a stay-at-home wife, weren't exactly rolling in dough. However, we were content with our current lifestyle. Above all, we were overjoyed when we had a baby last month. Every day was a blessing. And home, I picked up some daylight food from the supermarket today. Thanks! I'm sorry for being such a handful with my morning sickness. It's okay. I'm gonna hop in the shower now. Being pregnant was a first-time experience for me, and everything felt new. I had heard from friends who had been pregnant about the struggles of morning sickness, but mine was much worse than the usual. Not only household chores, but even getting up to go to the bathroom was a struggle when I was lying on the couch. However, my husband was understanding and supported me like a true gentleman. This made me believe that I could get through this tough phase. Many of my friends had husbands who weren't as understanding during pregnancy. Knowing I didn't have that problem was a relief. However, we have my parents' 30th birthday anniversary tomorrow, so we're going to my family's place. I'm sorry, can I maybe skip it? It's just the 3-hour drive one way might be too much for me right now. I've always been there for you. What your least you can do is listen to me once in a while. It's pretty thoughtless of you to consider missing my parents' big day. When we announced our pregnancy, they came to celebrate and even helped with some wedding costs. But even considering how much I appreciate them, my morning sickness was just too intense to think about attending their 60th celebration. I believe my husband understands that I'm suffering from morning sickness, but he can't truly feel what it's like. So it seems like he really wants me to attend no matter what. We can visit them another day. Would that be okay? I think your mother-in-law would understand. We're always indebted to my folks. It's plain rude not to go. Plus, I already told them you're fine and gonna come, so don't look too sick in front of them. Action, I get where he's coming from, but he could be a little more considerate about my situation. Stress is the worst enemy during pregnancy, and his parents' place is a 3-hour drive away from here. Just we'd leave early in the morning and probably return late at night. But if he's already told them we're coming, it's hard for me to back out. And I didn't want to argue further and worsen his mood, so I reluctantly agreed. Thankfully, I had medication to lessen my morning sickness, and I decided to take it before we left the next day. As expected, I felt terrible in the morning, but thanks to the meds, I felt a bit better. I thought, maybe I can get through just this one day. So we headed to his parents' place. Their house was out in the countryside, and as we got closer, the roads got worse. The bumpy ride made me feel even sicker, and just the thought of taking the same route back home weighed on my mind. But I tried to compose myself before we arrived. That factors, the roads were busy being the weekend, and it took about 3.5 hours. But when I finally arrived at his parents' place, I took a few deep breaths and tried to enjoy the rest of the day. I took a few deep breaths to compose myself before entering. It's been a while. Thank you so much for coming. I told James it would be okay if he came by himself, knowing you weren't feeling well. Are you really okay? I'm fine. Thank you for your concern, I figured. As my mother-in-law, having given birth to James and his brother, understood morning sickness more than I did. She knew the struggles and was concerned about me right from the get-go. If my mother-in-law was saying all that, I felt like I probably didn't need to come in the first place. But since I was already there, complaining to my husband now wouldn't help. Besides, the main focus was on the two people celebrating their 60th birthday, and I tried my best not to draw unnecessary attention. But it's pretty exhausting, both physically and mentally, to be on my guard all day. By the time we left, I think my fatigue was evident. I didn't want to inconvenience my driving husband, so I didn't sleep in the passenger seat, even though I wanted to. Why did you look so bored? I didn't mean to. I'm sorry. My parents are there. You know you have to be more considerate, right? Yeah. I'm sorry. I do think I looked tired before we left his parents' place. My mother-in-law even said, sorry for keeping you up so late, especially being pregnant, when we were leaving. I understand that my husband might be upset about that, but I wish he'd be more considerate of how I'm feeling first. It's not like I complained, and even with the morning sickness, I tried my best all day to not let it show. Usually, if I can't handle the housework, I'd rest. Witness simple "were you okay in the car" have been nice. It's like I didn't endure or sacrifice anything. Why can't he understand my feelings more? Such feelings welled up inside me, but I thought anything I'd say to my husband now would just add fuel to the fire. Whether it's morning sickness or whatever, he only seemed to focus on the fact that I looked tired in front of his parents and seemed oblivious to anything else. But then came a sermon from him, and after it seemed he was satisfied, he went silent. The 2-hour ride home was filled with an indescribable tension. By the time we got home, it was past 10 p.m., and I was completely drained. Except, of course, having driven such a long distance, he must have been even more tired than I was. But I was at my limit and immediately laid down on the couch. Just when I felt relieved, a wave of sleepiness hit me. I thought, if I fall asleep now, that won't be good. I need to at least change my clothes and get to the bedroom. Hey, there's no beer in the fridge. Didn't you put any in after drinking last night? At least manage that much. I'm going to take a bath, so go buy some now. What? Now? It's already past 10 p.m., and I've been exhausted all day from morning sickness. Asking me to go out and buy it now is just devilish, isn't it? In other words, given how he's been pushing me, I've been feeling that he might not care about me as much as he did when we first got married, but I never imagined it would be to this extent. He was grumpy in the car, too. I figured he'd get really mad if I refused, but I'm seriously at my limit. There's no way I'm walking to the convenience store to buy beer at this hour. Come on, that's just not possible. I'm exhausted, and I had a rough day with morning sickness. I've told you this so many times. To me, that's just a bunch of irrelevant talk. I'm going to take a bath now, so make sure you get it before I get out. If not, I'm seriously going to be pissed. With that, my husband, looking at me with cold, accusing eyes, went straight to the bathroom without listening to anything I had to say. That's the look on my husband's face, glaring at me as if I were some sort of villain, made it clear he was dead serious. After he went to the bath, I let out a frustrated sigh and hit the couch hard with my fist. If I don't go now, I really don't know what'll happen next. This will be my last chore for the night. I'll finish shopping before he gets out of the bath and head straight to bed. With that in mind, I hurried to the convenience store, bought 3 beers, and rushed home. Luckily, my husband, who tends to take long baths, hadn't come out yet. After putting the beers in the fridge, I headed straight for the bedroom. Though, as soon as I changed and lay down, I fell asleep, as if I had passed out. I guess I was that tired, and I'm impressed I pushed myself this far. My husband, after enjoying his nightly drinks, must have slept in because he didn't wake up until midday the next day. Spring sickness was still bad, but it was somewhat better than the day before. Just thinking I should get things done while I can, I managed to finish most of the house chores by mid-morning. As my belly grew larger, every task felt heavier, and the supportive husband I knew at the beginning of my pregnancy was nowhere to be seen. He used to be there for me, but now he just complains. I don't know what changed his attitude, but I've been doing my best every day so he won't complain, and both mentally and physically. I've been exhausted. Fast forward, and I'm now in my final month of pregnancy. Raising the child will surely be a challenge once they're born, but at least this tough pregnancy journey is coming to an end. Thinking that I'll finally meet our beloved baby soon, I can't help but smile. But the sense of excitement was slowly building in my heart, different from the tough days I've been through. Welcome home. You're late, aren't you? Got some work stuff. What's for dinner tonight? I was thinking of having the pizza and burgers I got from Costco the other day. Seriously? Cousin food again. You making fun of me? I'm pregnant, and doing housework is all I can handle right now. That if my husband helped with the regular chores, I could adjust my energy and time for cooking. But right now, it's impossible for me to do everything. He gets super angry if I don't do the chores, even though I have to cut down on cooking time. I wish he'd help out a bit, if he's gonna complain. My husband, who's about to become a father soon, doesn't act like one at all. I'm wondering if this is really going to work out. I decided to speak my mind because I've been holding back a lot. Look, it's impossible for me to do everything by myself. It'd be nice if you helped. When you have time, you're always out drinking or playing golf. You're hardly ever home. I'm about to give birth, so expecting me to be perfect is just unreasonable. Are you trying to go against me? I'm just stating the facts. I figured he'd definitely get mad at me for saying all that. But I was at my breaking point. I spoke my mind without holding back my emotions. After I finished speaking, I calmed down, bracing myself for the lecture I was sure my husband would give me. But shockingly, he just started fiddling with his phone without saying a word. Weird. Why isn't he yelling at me today? Earlier, I couldn't hold back and said something pretty harsh. Normally, my husband would have snapped back at me tenfold. Maybe the mention of being almost due made him realize his responsibility as a soon-to-be father for the first time. Well, anyway, I'm just glad nothing happened, and that night we had frozen food for dinner. Because he came home late, we didn't finish dinner until around midnight. After taking a bath, it was past 1 and when I was ready for bed. Hey, before you go to bed, can you check the mailbox? Now, at this hour, what's the big deal? It's just a small thing. Was he still upset about me serving frozen food for dinner, I wonder? Well, he hasn't been nagging me as he usually does, so I don't want to push it. And checking the mailbox will only take a minute. As he asked, I went to the gate to check the mailbox. But there was nothing inside. I wonder what he wanted me to see. It was deep winter, and temperatures were well below freezing at night. Dressed in thin pajamas, I nearly froze as I hurried back towards the house. But just as I reached for the doorknob, there was a click from the inside and the door was locked. What on earth? What's going on? Come on, let me in. It's below freezing, probably about as cold as inside a freezer, right? You seem to really love those frozen meals, so why not stay out here and freeze with them? Wait, no wait. Print. It seemed like my husband had either gone to bed or was ignoring me. That it was 2 in the morning and it would be impossible to stay out in this freezing cold until dawn. Besides, I was only planning to check the mailbox and head right back, so I'm really underdressed. I felt like I might freeze to death, and my face and hands were burning from the cold, and my body was shivering uncontrollably. I didn't know what to do. My thoughts were becoming foggy. I repeatedly pressed the doorbell, hoping my husband would come to my aid, but there was no response from him. Was this his way of getting back at me freezing frozen food? Because of temple, I hoped he'd let me in after a few minutes, so I kept calling out to him from outside. But time just went by, and there was no sign of my husband. I was getting so cold that I was running out of energy. How much longer would I have to wait? Just as I was thinking this, I heard footsteps approaching from behind. What happened to you? Exasperation, I was taken aback by this unfamiliar man, but he appeared to be a bartender who worked at a nearby bar. Since he usually slept during the day, I'd never run into him before. It seems he closed up shop early that day and was returning home around 2 a.m. when he ran into me. What's going on? At the very least, let me get you something to wear. Deterring though he was a stranger in the neighborhood, his gesture of offering his coat without inviting me into his home felt genuinely gentlemanly. It made me trust him, at least a little. He continued to listen to my story outside my house. Of course, normally I'd never share personal family matters with a stranger, but I was so emotionally overwhelmed at the moment, it wasn't the time to be concerned about that. I borrowed his cell phone and reached out to some folks I knew. I promised to repay him later and decided to spend the night at a business hotel. Once I reached the warm hotel room, a sense of relief washed over me, and I quickly drifted off to sleep. Before I knew it, morning had come. After checking out, I headed home. But to my surprise, waiting at the gate were my in-laws. I expressed my gratitude for them coming so quickly after my call last night. But the moment I stepped onto the property, I was left speechless. What on earth are you doing? There was my husband, freezing without any clothes on. Even in the morning, the temperature hadn't risen above 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Why wasn't he wearing anything? It made no sense. But what was even stranger was the glaring look my in-laws were giving him. Could it be that they did this? As these thoughts ran through my mind and I tried to grasp the situation, I was truly sorry. We came over right after it happened and disciplined our foolish son. But discipline, I knew it. The whole situation was orchestrated by my in-laws. When the bartender helped me out, I immediately borrowed his phone to call my mother-in-law. I was so lucky that she picked up quickly and that I remembered her number. I honestly told her everything that had happened with my husband and the recent incident. And there was another thing. I shared a shocking suspicion with her that I had heard from the bartender. "Thank you for all you've done. It's the least we could do." As you mentioned, the rumors of his affair turned out to be true. We had a spare key to your house, so we came in early this morning and confronted our foolish son. Checked his phone, and there was clear evidence of his affair. I knew it. I felt a pang of pity for my husband, abandoned outside in the cold without any clothes. But the moment I confirmed his infidelity, any sympathy I had for him vanished. I had never considered the possibility of his cheating before. The suspicion arose just yesterday. The bartender told me he had seen my husband with a younger woman. Because of his line of work in an area with lots of nightclubs and bars, he had seen my husband with a young lady a few weeks ago. Before we were married, we used to have barbecues in our backyard quite often, so I believe he recognized us. When I first heard about it, I didn't have any solid proof and I wanted to trust my husband. But if he had found someone new and stopped caring about me and stopped supporting me, especially while I'm pregnant, everything made sense. Rachel, I had shared all of this with my in-laws over the phone, but to find out it was true, it's just disappointing. If you're freezing, why don't you ask your beloved girlfriend to warm you up with her body warmth? No, James looked as pale as a ghost, his lips turning a shade of purple. Is it considering my in-laws have been here for over 3 hours? He must have been left out in the cold for at least that long. It makes me wonder just how much he suffered. Well, he tried to do the same to me, so he's in no position to complain. He probably can't hold a proper conversation because the cold has numbed his mind. I care less. I think you know this, but I won't accept it. I'm going to file for divorce. He already looked pretty miserable from the cold, but at the mention of divorce, his face went even paler. I figured if he was treating me like this and having a good time with his mistress, she must be more important to him. Then again, maybe he's just scared of the potential alimony and child support. Either way, I doubt he ever loved me, and I don't have a shred of love left for him either. I'm going to sue his lover for emotional damage too, so you better be ready. Hold on, let's talk. There's nothing to talk about. I'll decide on the alimony and child support. You don't have a choice in this. Oh, your place. The affair my husband had came to light, and we consulted a lawyer they knew. It was decided that he would pay me the standard amount. Of course, I couldn't trust a husband who cheated, so he made a lump sum payment. He took out a loan to cover the alimony, but when it came to 20 years of child support, that was too much for him to handle, even with a loan. My in-laws graciously stepped in to help. This was with the divorce finalized. He's now just a stranger to me. Ex-husband's going to pay my in-laws monthly for the child support they covered. This, from what I heard, it turned out that ex-husband hadn't even told his mistress he was married. She dumped him when she found out, leaving him all alone. He's now living with his parents and giving them 90% of his earnings to repay the debt. The remaining 10% barely covers his food, leaving him with no spending money. I'm not sure how long he'll continue this way, but with no savings and only the passing of time, once he's paid off his debt to his parents, it seems they might kick him out. About even when he's free from this financial hell, it seems he's got nothing but despair ahead of him. Well, he brought this upon himself, so I guess he's getting what he deserves. As for me, I'm living at my parents' house, doing my best to raise my child as a single mom. I'm still figuring out the ropes of parenthood, but my mom's been a great help, especially during those sleepless nights. It's made the whole experience mentally easier and enjoyable. I plan on relying on my parents for a while, and once my son starts elementary school, I think I'll get back to work. Plus, I still keep in touch with my in-laws and plan to visit them with my son a few times a year. While my ex-husband may have ruined my life, I've got a precious new beginning with my baby, and I'm determined to lead a happy life from here on out. Thank you for taking care of my mother-in-law, who has dementia. My brother-in-law and his wife had promised to move with her, but they dumped her belongings and swiftly left, forcing us to take care of her. My husband and I were in shock, but my mother-in-law was nodding with a smile. However, today's smile from her wasn't her usual confused one. My mother-in-law waved at their car with a grin, and then she loudly said, "They don't have a home anymore." No more home. What in the world is she talking about? What was this surprising counterattack from my mother-in-law on my brother-in-law and his wife who were looking forward to moving? My name is Christine Parker. I am 34 and work at a company. My husband David and I shared the same hobbies, and we both tragically lost our parents early in life. David lost his father during his college years, while I lost both my parents in a car accident when I was young. We both had longings for a family, and that's why we got married. But now I'm left to face the challenges of single parenthood, and David is left with nothing but despair and debt. Ifume will make the best of this situation, but I can't help but feel a sense of injustice for what David has brought upon himself. We both had longings for a warm family, so we got married pretty quickly. At the time of our wedding, my mother-in-law told me, "From now on, think of me as your real mother. You can always rely on me." It was comforting for someone like me, who had lost her parents at a young age, to hear such words. After our marriage, we frequently visited her. Those were happy days, but I had one concern. It was David's elder brother, Michael. Michael, 2 years older than David, was 36 at the time we got married and was still single, living at home. I had no problem with him living at home, but Michael was the complete opposite of David in terms of personality. While David is reserved and humble, Michael judges people by their appearance and status. If he deems someone beneath him, he's outright rude, a typical jerk. Moreover, Michael looks down on David and me, working at an average company, and ridicules us every time he sees us. "What? You're here again? It must be nice to have so much free time. I'm working in a trading company, can't afford to be so leisurely." Sits, and even though we were visiting to see my mother-in-law, Michael would often say such things. I'm really sorry about the rude things Michael says. I know I spoiled him, but lately he doesn't listen to me at all. My mother-in-law always apologized in his absence. I know I might be a pain sometimes, but I genuinely enjoy talking to you, Christine. Do you think you'll visit again? She had said that to me. We didn't want to leave her alone with Michael, and more than anything, I genuinely enjoyed our chats with her. So, David and I continued to visit her often. At the take-in appointment, about a year later, we suddenly heard that Michael was getting married. We knew Michael had found a girlfriend and had moved out, but was he getting married? It was quite the surprise for us. But after meeting his bride-to-be, it all made sense. Emily, the person my friend married, sure was a character with strong quirks. She identifies her occupation as a live streamer. Girls as cute as me will always be in demand. No matter the age, Emily boldly stated this upon our first meeting, even though she's turning 35 this year. I'm not one to comment on someone's profession, but I was taken aback that she could confidently refer to herself as a cute girl at 35. While the rest of us were taken aback by Emily's boastful introduction, Michael was sitting next to her, nodding proudly. We actually talked about wanting to become YouTubers as a couple, but my company has a strict no-side job policy. They're so behind the times, aren't they? I genuinely felt relieved that my brother-in-law's company had that policy, but I wondered if it was okay for Michael to be nearing 40 and still talking like that. As we listened with a mix of astonishment, Emily suddenly turned the conversation to me. By the way, Christine, what do you do for work? I wished she'd just leave me alone. Oh, I felt that way. I couldn't ignore her, so I briefly introduced myself. But as soon as Emily heard my story, she quickly responded, "Really? Doesn't that sound a bit bland? Are you actually enjoying your life doing that? Seriously, you guys seem to have such dull lives. It's a once-in-a-lifetime chance, How to live it up or you're missing out." But to top it all off, even Michael joined in with those remarks. With a concerned look on her face, my mother-in-law said, "Well, if you two have decided on this, I won't oppose your marriage. Just make sure you don't inconvenience others and work together to live an honest life." After my mother-in-law made her point clear, the two of them left in a hurry. I really wondered if those two would be all right in the future. Watching them leave, we exchanged worried glances. Michael was a handful on his own, and now there was another problematic person to deal with. Still, for my mother-in-law and David, Michael is a cherished family member just the same. We immediately began discussing how we should interact with the two of them moving forward. Despite our concerns, everything was peaceful for about a year. We had offered my mother-in-law to stay with us. However, she reassured us, "I'm fine on my own. Don't worry about me. I've plenty of friends around here. Just focus on living a happy life together." Indeed, my mother-in-law is sociable and has many friends in the neighborhood. But she's already 63 years old. While folks in their 60s these days are still quite spry, we can't help but worry about the what-ifs. With these thoughts in mind, we visited her that day. Then, to our surprise, Michael and Emily had come over. Just in the years since they got married, they hadn't visited the house at all, yet now they were lounging around as if they owned the place. "Oh, David, you guys are here too." That's the occasion. When David said that, Michael gave David a look as if he wanted to say something, but then turned to my mother-in-law and said, "All right then, take care." At that, they promptly left. What were they here for? What were they here for?
How's that? What's the occasion?
It's nothing really. she didn't seem inclined to talk about it at all. Michael's last words had piqued my curiosity, so I chimed in, "You say it's nothing, but there must be a reason." "What was that?"
Please, if there's anything going on, let us know.
"Let us know any time." In the end, we told her that and headed home for the day. That evening, David received a call from Michael. Michael said, "It seems like you guys visit Mom quite often. Could you stop?" He blurted out such a thing unexpectedly. When pressed for an explanation, he said, "You guys must be busy with work, right? Emily is working from home and will take care of Mom, so just stop coming over." Then he abruptly hung up the phone. Driven by our concerns, we visited her the following weekend. And sure enough, Michael and Emily were there too. The moment Michael saw us, he looked irritated and said, "What do you want? I told you. We're going to take care of Mom. There's no need for you to come." We tried to defend ourselves, but my mother-in-law's subsequent words left us speechless. David, Christine, thank you for always coming over despite being busy. But as Michael said, from now on he will be visiting. So you two enjoy your weekends. But to our shock, my mother-in-law was siding with Michael. Hearing this, Michael said, "You heard what Mom said, right? If you get it, then get going." But that said, we were kicked out of the house. He couldn't believe it. But if my mother-in-law says so, there's nothing we can do. Still concerned for her, we started calling her more often. "Everything okay? You're doing well? You're doing well?" Every time she'd reply, "Michael is visiting, so I'm fine." "But how about you two? You're doing well?" Every time she'd reply, "Michael is visiting, so I'm fine." "But how about you two? You having a good time?" She seemed more concerned about us than herself. "We're having fun, but we'd like to see you from time to time. Can we come over this weekend? I've already made plans with Michael this weekend. I'm sorry, maybe next time." In the end, she'd always decline our visits. We didn't mind what Michael said, but when my mother-in-law pushed us away, it felt like a rejection, making us a bit lonely. Then one day, after days like that, David received another call from Michael. It's, "We're going to move, so there's no point in you coming here anymore." David was at a loss for words with the sudden news. Michael was about to hang up the phone. In a panic, I quickly asked, "Why are you suddenly moving?" Michael, with a sharp click of his tongue, replied, "You guys haven't been to the house recently, so you probably don't know. Mom's going zenily. We're worried about leaving her alone, so we're building a new house and moving." My mother-in-law is becoming senile. "I can't be. She was fine the last time we spoke on the phone." Last time we spoke on the phone, but Michael snapped. "You only talked to her briefly, right? How could you tell from that? She got dementia." And with that, he hung up. We hurriedly called my mother-in-law and asked, "Are you feeling all right? Everything okay?" But she simply replied, "I'm fine, I'm fine. You don't need to worry about a thing." And then she hung up. What on earth is happening? That weekend, we hurriedly headed to her place. Actually, Michael and Emily were there. "But you're back again? I told you not to come anymore." Michael approached us with a sharp click of his tongue. "How can we just sit still after hearing such news?" "We're worried," I replied, but Michael snapped, "Shut up." However, my mother-in-law just listened to our argument with a smile and a nod. I couldn't help but look at her and whispered her name. Michael, having heard that, said, "I told you. She doesn't make sense anymore. We can't leave her alone, so we're taking her in. That's our kindness." He said it with a smirk. "If that's the case, we can." But before I could finish, Michael interrupted. "Both of you work, right? What are you gonna do with this senile old woman during the day?" "Don't talk about her that way," I blurted out. But in fact, no one is home during the day in our house. I couldn't argue that point and just remained silent. I just stayed silent. It's frustrating, but maybe we have to do as Michael says for now. Feeling utterly helpless, we said, "We'll come visit on our days off." Upon saying that, Emily then replied, "If you come over that often, it'll be such a bother for me." I really don't like it, with her usual lisping way of speaking. The thought of leaving my mother-in-law with someone like her made me worry. I exchanged a worried glance with David, but he just looked down and shook his head. But whether my mother-in-law understood or not, she just kept smiling and said, "It's okay." Later, we got the moving schedule from Michael and reluctantly headed home. On moving day, when we arrived at the in-laws, we were told that the packing was just finished. Ex-Emily remarked, "If you were gonna come, you should have come earlier and helped." So bad timing on your part, but when we peeked inside, there were still many items left. "There's still a lot of stuff here," I pointed out, and Michael replied, "We don't want to take this old junk with us. We're gonna toss it. A few pieces of clothing are more than enough for an old lady." Both Emily and Michael were saying such things together. "Hey, stop it!" I yelled in frustration. When I yelled in frustration, Michael shot back, "Then you guys take care of her." And they both jumped in their car. As they drove off, they threw a bag containing a few of my mother-in-law's clothes out the window, shouting, "Good luck with the old lady. Bye." They left us with those parting words, then coolly drove off to their new place. David and I stood there, dumbfounded. Yet my mother-in-law just kept smiling and nodding. But today, my mother-in-law wasn't wearing her usual absent-minded smile. Instead, she had that sharp and slightly mischievous grin I knew so well from back in the day. As I looked at her, puzzled, my mother-in-law waved cheerfully at their car. Then she said just one thing. "They don't have a home anymore." "Wait, no home? Or pastry?" Looking at David, I saw he was just as bewildered, staring at my mother-in-law. But ignoring our dumbfounded faces, my mother-in-law briskly picked up her bags and said, "David, Christine, how long are you gonna just stand there? Come on, let's go inside and have some snacks." She just looked back at us with a smile full of glee and beckoned us to the entrance. Once inside, she explained everything to us. A student that we learned was utterly astonishing. The reason why they recently came to visit her house and her scheme upon discovering it. Each piece of information was beyond our wildest imaginations. A few months back, they suddenly showed up at her place. Feeling a sense of foreboding, my mother-in-law discreetly listened in as Michael said, "That old hag must have stashed some cash somewhere." "Are you sure this is really okay?" he said in a hushed tone. "Hey, keep your voice down," she responded equally quietly. Michael went on, "If we play our cards right and end up living with her, we can take over her assets." but I really don't want to live with your mom. For the money, we have to bear with it. If only Shed goes senile, we could hand her off to David. That would be perfect. I wonder how we can make her senile. Is there a way to hasten it? It seems that for the first year of their marriage, they had a great time living together in their rented apartment. However, after a year of reckless spending, they blew through their savings and Michael's salary wasn't enough to support them anymore. Emily claimed to be a live streamer, but she hardly had any fans and was only broadcasting to a handful of viewers out of self-satisfaction. Actually, that meant no real income was coming in. With their day-to-day life becoming more challenging, the two even resorted to borrowing from loan sharks. Desperate, they plotted to get their hands on my mother-in-law's assets. My mother-in-law was widowed young, but as it turns out, my father-in-law had been in real estate. Taking over, my mother-in-law turned out to be quite wealthy from the real estate business. Upon overhearing this conversation, she thought that if she passed on the assets as they were, it would ruin the two of them. If they wish for it, then I shall oblige and play the part of the forgetful one. With that thought in her mind, she decided to feign dementia to scare the two of them off. As unaware that she was just pretending to have dementia, the couple brazenly started discussing their plans to take over the assets right in front of her. No way Mom's really lost it, huh? Emily, did you do something? Of course not. Maybe my wishes worked, but what are we going to do now? If she's gone senile this early, will we actually get the money? Don't worry. First, we tell her we want to build a house to live together. 8 point per sections. That way she'll build the house and put it in my name. Then we say we need extra cash and get another $100,000. I bet if we play up the dementia angle, David and the others will say we should take care of it. Once we have her blessing, we can pass her off and live it up in our new place. How about that? My plan's bulletproof, right? Yeah, sounds awesome. But do you really think it'll go that smoothly? Don't worry about it. She's out of it, and plus, David and the others are so annoyingly righteous. It'll be fine. It's scary to think they were planning on a Colleen all along to dump her on us after securing the new house and the money. But my mother-in-law, even hearing this, didn't panic and continued her preparations calmly, pretending to be confused. We were like, if you had just told us. But she said, I didn't want to involve you guys. Sorry for the worry. My mother-in-law said that laughing. However, hearing this, a question popped up for us. Wait a sec, but what about the house? When David said this, my mother-in-law chuckled. You'll see soon enough. It's about time, isn't it? Right at that moment, the phone rang. It was Michael. When my mother-in-law answered, he shouted, "What the heck is this?" Michael is yelling. They're telling me I can't live here because it's a rental contract. That's awful. You tricked us. Emily joined in, making a scene. Turns out there was more to my mother-in-law's plan. My mother-in-law had conspired with a realtor, an old friend of her late husband, to prepare the new house they had bought to be rented out instead. And today, she was waiting on site for them. Moreover, she had inflated the cost and taken extra money from them to build a large parking lot, leaving them without any money to their name. But with a smile, she informed him of this. And, hey, I'm the owner of this house, aren't I? Who gives you the right to do this? Oh, the owner. I seem to recall paying and putting it in my own name. You were supposed to be senile. Semele, what are you talking about? As you can see, I'm as sharp as ever. Damn you, old hag! I won't forget this. You'll never be forgiven. Michael was still yelling over the phone, even now. But my mother-in-law, unfazed and calm, replied, Michael, knock it off. You're an adult now. It's time to stand on your own 2 feet. But relying on others and taking them for granted, making a fool of everyone around you, that's no way to go through life. After saying that, she nonchalantly hung up the phone. Personally, she had already arranged for the movers to deliver the belongings not to the new house, but to a rental storage unit. Her friend was waiting at the storage facility, and she received confirmation that the belongings were safely delivered. I thought Michael's plan was diabolical, but it turned out my mother-in-law was even craftier. After that, Michael and Emily stormed into my mother-in-law's house, still fighting furiously. But since they were making such a scene when they arrived, we ended up calling the cops. And when the police showed up, Michael got violent with them too, and got himself arrested for obstructing an officer in the performance of their duties. Emily, who was watching, exclaimed, I didn't do anything, and then she just took off running. Even though Michael was arrested, he was released soon after, since it was his first offense. Perhaps when with nowhere else to go, he was allowed to stay at the company dorm out of the company's goodwill. But the whole mess had become known at work, and he's feeling pretty small about it. So he's biting the bullet and desperately working. Emily asked Michael for a divorce and went back to her parents' house, but she's been disowned because of the whole ordeal, and I heard she's living and working at a nightclub now. As for me, after all that went down, I got transferred to a department at my company that allows remote work, so now I'm working from home. And so we set up our new home near my mother-in-law's place and smoothly started living together with her. And we've become really good friends with the real estate agent who helped us with the move and the neighbors around my mother-in-law's house. And now we even go out together as families. If only we had done this from the start. We chat about this, living peacefully day by day. Living peacefully day by day. Isn't today the anniversary of you and Dad's marriage? I've got a present for you. As she said this, the daughter presented a document. It was a divorce paper, with the husband's section already filled out. Sarah is truly a considerate and kind child, right? She prepared such a wonderful gift for our anniversary. You could have made more of an effort to look more put together, even at your age. There are plenty of women in their 50s who look young and beautiful. I don't need an old lady like you anymore, as my dad says so. I've never once thought of you as my mother in my whole 25 years. If you don't want to get sued for verbal abuse, you had better pack up and leave quickly. Both of them were wearing hideous grins as they hurled abuse at me. Are you really sure about this? Things could get pretty rough, you know? A policy prance. I said this with emphasis, looking them straight in the eye, silently conveying the gravity of their choice. I am Jennifer, a 55-year-old woman who works for a major brokerage firm. I lived in a single-family home in New York with my husband, who is years my junior, and our 25-year-old daughter. I met my husband, Mike, when I was 23. After graduating from high school, Mike, who was a part-timer, worked at a convenience store near where I work. I shopped there every day, so we naturally became acquainted. One day, I made a mistake at work and felt terribly down. Holding back tears, I somehow managed to get through my tasks and was about to leave the company to head home when I bumped into Mike by chance. Seeing my face, he seemed surprised at first, but quickly approached me with a friendly smile. "Hey, are you heading home? I just got off my shift too. How about grabbing a bite to eat? I know someone who works at a diner nearby." Taken aback by his sudden invitation, I froze. Then Mike, looking somewhat lonely, said, "Oh, did I bother you?" "I'm sorry. No, it's not that. I was just surprised, not bothered at all." Relieved by my response, Mike smiled and took my hand, leading me toward the diner. I went along with him for a meal, somewhat passively, but that day marked the beginning of a close relationship. After several dates, he asked me out. When my parents passed away unexpectedly, Mike supported me devotedly, and our relationship continued smoothly. At 25, I married Mike. He had mentioned being estranged from his parents, so we had a quiet wedding at a chapel abroad. Atation, though he was a non-regular staff member, Mike worked diligently and took over the household chores to help me, who was busy with work. When I was 30, I got pregnant with our daughter, Sarah, and Mike became a full-time homemaker, which allowed me to return to work soon after giving birth. We supported and cooperated with each other, living happily. I never doubted that these peaceful days would continue forever. When Sarah started kindergarten, I decided to entrust Mike with some financial responsibilities. Giving him a family credit card for necessary expenses, I kept a close eye on the card statements, and Mike never made frivolous purchases. Whilst managing our home life, well, I fondly recall seeing entries for indoor play areas for kids and children's clothing brands when Sarah was a baby. However, as she began elementary school, the situation started to look ominous. As to around that time, my workload increased, and I began neglecting to check the card statements, which turned out to be a mistake. One day, casually checking the bank account, I couldn't believe the amounts being withdrawn. The recorded figures were more than triple what I had anticipated, and looking back over 6 months, the expenses had gradually increased since Sarah's school entry. Luxury clothing and watches, star-rated restaurant lunches, and high-end hotel stays had all accumulated, resulting in a hefty sum. I believe being a full-time homemaker is a respectable job, and I understand that Mike might want to indulge occasionally. I hated the idea of arguing over money. Yet when the amounts became this significant, I could no longer stay silent. At night, I brought up the topic of the household expenses with Mike. But to my surprise, his calm demeanor instantly turned hostile, and he began to shout. So a full-time homemaker like me isn't allowed a little luxury now and then. You can focus on your job because I take care of everything at home. I've always appreciated what you do, Mike. That's why I don't mind occasional treats. But there has to be a limit. Achins, when I asked him, my husband raised his voice in a fit of anger. Cut it out. Always dumping the house chores on me, and then you have the nerve to nag about everything. This was the first time my husband had ever talked back to me like this. I got caught up in the heat of the moment and confronted him. Think about it. The amount of money spent doesn't make sense. There's no need to buy high-end clothes every month. And the cost for lunch is too much for one person. Who are you treating? I have my own social obligations, okay? Who I have lunch with and where is none of your business, right? You're one to talk going out drinking under the pretense of socializing. The reason I come home late from drinking is because of work-related socializing. It's not something I do because I want to. If I could, I would rather come home early to spend time with my family. Hearing my husband speak like that deeply saddened me. Social drinking after work is stressful and exhausting. I'd rather spend time with my family, and if I'm going to drink, I'd prefer to do it with you, Mike. I conveyed my feelings, but my husband just glared at me with a sullen look. After that, I didn't want to argue with him anymore, so I stopped nagging him about money. Still, I made sure to check the credit card statements regularly. His spending was getting worse. Not just fancy restaurant lunches, but it looked like he was also buying expensive jewelry for someone. I wanted to confront him immediately, but recalling our last exchange, I couldn't bring myself to do it. Then one day when I got home, our third grader, Sarah, came running up to me. Mom, my indoor shoes are too small. I need new ones. She held out her worn shoes to me, the heels crushed down. I had asked my husband to replace school supplies and outgrown clothes before. However, it seems he neglected to do so and blamed it on me. I asked him again to please take care of our daughter's needs. From that day on, I noticed a change in the way Sarah looked at me. Apparently, my husband had made it seem as though nothing could be bought without my permission, casting me in the light of a controlling wife. By the time I realized it, it was too late. As Sarah grew up, she began to crave designer wallets and the latest smartphones. She would beg her father, and when he hesitated, she would come to me. When I advised her to adopt a more reasonable attitude towards money, she called me a stingy old hag and began to show open hostility. My husband sided with Sarah, mocking me in their alliance. Whenever I spoke to him about the credit card bills, Sarah would come in and say, "Stop being mean to Dad."
If you made more money, we wouldn't have this problem. Why did Dad ever marry a stingy old hag like you? You should be more grateful for what Dad does for us. Without him, you'd probably be alone, living a sad, lonely life.
By the time Sarah reached high school, she had become as willful and reckless with money as her father. Feeling like I also had to do something, I kept earnestly talking to my daughter, but no matter how hard I tried, it was undone by my husband who, being a stay-at-home dad, spent more time with her than I did. However, once my daughter started working part-time, after graduating high school, my husband blatantly began to slack off on the housework. He seemed to be out often, and the house was empty when I returned from work. No cleaning or laundry had been done, and there was no meal prepared. Confronting my husband would surely just lead to a fight. My daughter was on his side, and there was no longer a place for me in this house. Then, one day, something definitive happened. It was our 30th wedding anniversary. When I came home from work, there stood my husband and daughter, grinning at me in the entryway, a chintz, and said, "Isn't it your wedding anniversary today? I have a present for you." While saying that, she handed me a document. It was a divorce paper with Mike's section already filled out. Sarah's such a considerate and kind girl to prepare such a wonderful gift for our anniversary. Phyllis, if only you'd made an effort to dress up a bit, even at your age. There are plenty of women in their 50s who still look young and beautiful.
"You don't need an old lady like you anymore," said Mike.
And since Dad says so, you know, I've never once thought of you as my mom in my 25 years. Well, if you don't want to be sued for emotional abuse, you'd better get out fast, Sarah added.
The two of them were throwing ugly sneers my way, spewing insults. "But you really sure about this? You're gonna regret it," I said, staring them down. Still, they kept grinning at me condescendingly. It was with a sigh, I took the divorce papers and said, "All right, let's get divorced."
Most of Mike's face relaxed with genuine happiness.
"Well then, since you're the breadwinner, we'll be taking the house. Sarah wants to live here with me, right? That's fine, isn't it?" "Sure, I don't mind. Take the furniture and appliances too. Do whatever you want with them," I replied calmly. Then Mike started talking about dividing assets. "And about the division of property, you should give me half of your savings too. After all, you are able to focus on your work because of me," he said with pride. I responded in a tone of disbelief. "Oh, you think I don't know anything? You've been smitten with another woman using my card. Let's see, about $200,000 over 15 years. I could sue for the misused funds and alimony. You know, if you don't want this to get messy, you better back off quietly." Mike had been having an affair with a woman he met through a dating app since Sarah was in elementary school. It seems Sarah knew and approved of it, as the documents from the detective agency included photos of Mike, his mistress, and Sarah all enjoying a vacation together. Seeing the color drain from Mike's face was something else. And Sarah's eyes were darting all over. They never dreamed I knew about the affair. "Sarah, I'm disowning you as my child. Since you don't need a miserly old lady like me, it's fine, right?" Well, ignoring their stunned faces, I packed my bags, took the divorce papers, and left the house. I spent the night at a hotel and submitted the divorce papers to the office the next day. Our divorce was finalized. Then I rented a reasonably priced apartment near my work and began living alone. But a year later, Sarah started calling me nonstop. Exhausted. I had cut ties and was ignoring her, but eventually, exasperated by the persistent calls, I decided to answer. When I picked up the phone, Sarah was shrieking so loudly it was breaking up. "What's this about demanding alimony now?"
"You've ruined my life,"
she exclaimed. Asked before the divorce, I met with his mistress. When I told her I was Mike's wife, she turned pale and started apologizing.
"I'm sorry, I had no idea he was married."
"It seems you've been quite involved with my daughter as well." I casually pressed the play button on the tape recorder, and a conversation of them cheerfully gossiping about me started to play. "I'm so sorry. No need for apologies. with all this evidence, I'll be demanding a suitable amount for damages. And that she had been seeing Mike, who was generous with his spending. Because of that, then to her, who looked utterly drained, I suggested in a kind tone, "You truly loved my husband, didn't you? And yet, asking for a substantial amount in damages doesn't sit right with me." But her expression brightened up instantly. "Yes, that's right. I really love Mike. Then, in light of your feelings, I won't press for the damages. Please, take responsibility and care for my husband to the end. If you ever abandon him, I'll come after you for the damages, all right?" At that moment, she probably didn't take it too seriously. But not long after, our divorce was finalized. For her, Mike was just a convenient source of luxury, courtesy of my money. When the divorce was settled, Mike joyfully told her. She panicked and pleaded for a reduction in the damages, but I refused. "You said you truly loved him, didn't you?" I asked. "If that was a lie, you must face the consequences." "I won't be satisfied otherwise." When I conveyed this, she had no choice but to marry Mike. Sarah welcomed her as well, and maybe things were fine at the start. But it seems she couldn't stand it for long. Mike's lavish lifestyle was possible because of my earnings. After I was gone, they couldn't reduce their standard of living, splurging money like it was water. She worked tirelessly day and night trying to support their lifestyle, but Sarah seemed to scorn her, comparing her to me and hurling awful epithets. And she was hurling awful insults. Moreover, that house still had about 5 years left on the mortgage. A payment weighed heavily on them, and eventually she couldn't take it anymore and left a completed divorce form before disappearing. Learning she had run away, I sent a certified letter to my ex-husband, burdened not only with everyday expenses and the mortgage, but also the damages. Mike was at his wits' end. He's hearing Sarah lash out in semi-hysteria. I couldn't help but snicker. "It's because of what your dad did that we're in this situation with the damages. You're struggling now because you've lived beyond your means. If you're going to blame someone, don't blame me. Blame your father for not teaching you how to manage money properly." I told her calmly and then ignored the still ranting Sarah, hanging up the phone. And that very day, I went to the store and changed my smartphone along with the number. After that, I left everything to my lawyer, who successfully secured the damages for me. According to the lawyer, Mike was initially very resistant. She and I met after I divorced that woman. It's outrageous to call it an affair. Plus, I've been the victim of her emotional abuse for years. She's a horrible woman, he complained to the lawyer. But I had been recording all the verbal abuse and had submitted evidence collected from the private detective, as well as the credit card statements, which made it clear who was at fault. When the lawyer informed them that we had ample evidence, they seemed to realize that dragging out the discussion would be disadvantageous and agreed to make payments, albeit reluctantly. Moreover, that house went into foreclosure because the mortgage payments couldn't be met. Sarah grew tired of her father and seems to have found a live-in job and moved out. After hearing my final words, perhaps she took a hard look at herself because she left a letter addressed to me with the lawyer. In it, she wrote that she was hired as a live-in maid at a certain inn and included words of apology to me. See, even so, I haven't just let bygones be bygones, but in my heart, I sent my daughter some silent support. Mike ended up filing for bankruptcy, just abandoned by his family and with nowhere to live. For a while, he was seen wrapped in cardboard, sleeping in parks and on riverbanks. Even in such straits, it seems he couldn't correct his reckless spending habits. He apparently got involved with loan sharks and is now missing. It's no longer any of my business. On my end, I've been living a peaceful life while continuing with my job. Recently, I welcomed a new kitten into the family. It's a little charmer with folded ears. Gotstokui always comes snuggling up to me with a sweet look on its face. Today, when I sat on the couch, it climbed onto my lap and purred away. It was so endearing that it brought a smile to my face. I think to myself that I have to stay healthy for my grandchildren. Stay healthy for at least another 30 years for this little one. It's how I spend my peaceful days. Looks like a limited edition accessory. Why does my younger sister-in-law have something like this? Or importantly, respect your own sister over some other woman. You stupid brother. He says on the day of the wedding. During the spare time before the ceremony, I tried to calm my nerves by watching my cat through a pet camera. However, what the pet camera showed was not my beloved cat, but my dolled-up sister-in-law who was attending our wedding. They're unaware of the pet camera in the room. She was freely rummaging through my personal belongings. When I showed this to my husband, he blew up like a hot water heater and charged into the room where his relatives were waiting. This is broadcasting the live footage to the entire family. My sister-in-law was caught humming a tune while voicing her grievances about my husband and trying on my personal items. Upon seeing her outrageous behavior, my in-laws turned pale and rushed out in a hurry. Just minutes later, a devastating comeuppance was in store for my sister-in-law, who thought she had not been caught and took bold actions. I've been working at the company I joined in my final year of university for 3 years. It's about 2 years after I started working. A male colleague whom I began to regard as more than a friend confessed his desire for a serious relationship with the intent of marriage. I accepted his proposal without hesitation. A year has passed since then, and we are now in full swing preparing for marriage. Our new home is located not far from my in-laws' place, and with the pretext of a wedding gift, both our parents contributed little by little, and we bought a pre-owned single-family home. The remaining amount of the purchase price was covered by a mortgage, but since both my husband and in-laws agreed, I should keep working post-marriage. We were optimistic that working together would allow us to pay it off sooner. There was a reason for choosing a single-family home. I had an extraordinary love for cats, and I lived surrounded by several cats at my parents' home. Just when I decided to attend a university in another state and had to live alone, of course, I never considered parting from my cats. My parents strongly opposed me taking a cat with me to live alone, but I persuaded them by saying I would work part-time and take responsibility for it. To the end, I was only able to bring one cat from my parents' home, but I pride myself on not letting my cat feel deprived while I balanced my studies and part-time work. After graduation, I continued to live in the same pet-friendly apartment, But post-marriage, it was undeniable that the apartment was too small. I was very sad at the thought of possibly having to return my cat to my parents' house. To me, cats are almost like soulmates. Having my dear cat nearby brings me peace and happiness. Having my dear cat with me has allowed me to endure tough exams and overcome the loneliness of living alone for the first time. My husband was aware of my passion for cats even before we started dating, so he was okay with keeping a cat. However, it was challenging to find a pet-friendly apartment or condo. Finding a small space suitable for a single person wasn't too hard, but considering 2 adults and the possibility of children in the future, along with rent considerations, the search was proven a comty. One day when we went to my in-laws' house for wedding introductions, I hit it off with my mother-in-law over our love of cats. My mother-in-law, though an in-law herself, was a local like my in-laws, so I thought she might have information on pet-friendly rentals and consulted with her. She was thrilled at the prospect of living with a cat and suggested, with much excitement, "Why don't you just buy a single-family home?" As it turns out, my mother-in-law loves cats and lived with them before marrying, but had to give up cohabiting with them after discovering my father-in-law's cat allergy. Just with this background and perhaps feeling a bit guilty, my father-in-law didn't argue against the idea and decided to help fund our home purchase. It didn't seem fair to rely only on my in-laws, so when I explained the situation to my parents, they offered to help for the sake of the cat. My father kept insisting it was strictly for the cat's benefit, but my mother told me he's just shy. Don't worry about it, it's a wedding gift, and shared a knowing smile. My dad has always been shy about expressing his true feelings, and it's not like he needed to be shy at a time like this, so my mother and I couldn't help but laugh together. With the help of our parents, we were able to settle on our new home much sooner than expected and decided to move before the wedding. My mother-in-law, who adores cats, is still in her youthful 50s. She works part-time on some days, takes up hobbies, and like clockwork rejuvenates herself monthly at a cat cafe. Seeing how she's that kind of person, I thought our cat would warm up to her in no time. So I quickly invited her over to our new place, and to my surprise, our cat took to her more than I imagined, and she seemed to have a blast. Ever since then, she's been visiting frequently not just to play with the cat, but also to share long-lasting recipes and secretly spill the beans on my husband's favorite dishes. She really goes out of her way, and it has made my relationship with her very good. My husband and I are already living together in our new home, so it feels like married life has already started, even though the wedding is still ahead. We work at the same company, but once our marriage was decided, my husband got transferred to another department. Assumption, it seems he had already requested a transfer, so he's pretty pumped about moving to the department he wanted. Our work start times are the same, but we come home at different hours. Whoever gets home first starts preparing dinner, and I think we're doing quite well at splitting the household chores down the middle. During the commute, my husband often reads the newspaper because of his job, while I've made it a routine to check on our cat through the pet camera I installed at home. Even in the crowded train, getting soothed by my cat cuts my stress in half. It's just one good thing after another. The conversation might jump around a bit, but when I went to my husband's family home to formally introduce myself, the in-laws weren't the only ones I met for the first time. I had heard about his unmarried sister since we started dating. My sister-in-law is quite the free spirit, with a passion for international travel. Instead of holding down a regular job, she does various part-time gigs to save up for her trips. Seems like she's living the dream. I always thought it was great to have passions, and folks with their own interests tend to respect each other's and get along just fine. So her not having a 9-to-5 or being spontaneous wasn't a big deal to me. As the tree told, my own decision to work full-time was largely to keep up a lifestyle surrounded by cats. And the appeal of having paid leave in case something happened to them was not lost on me. I'm pretty keen on traveling myself. Back when I lived at home, I went on a few international family trips. Learning about unknown worlds is always a plus, and I figured I'd get along with my sister-in-law just fine. My husband, however, gave me an earful about how naive my thinking was. He vented about all the troubles he's had because of her. Like how his money would magically shrink, or how she'd dip into the savings he'd built up from his own part-time work. Physical esky perceptions, thinking his piggy bank was too vulnerable. He had his folks set him up with his own bank account. But even then, it seemed she'd somehow withdraw from it without his consent. Back in the day, he used easy-to-remember pins, which pretty much gave her free rein in. He said it felt just like being robbed. He was pretty steamed up, maybe reliving those emotions, because she also had a habit of using his stuff without asking. They seemed to be on pretty bad terms. There didn't seem to be any lies in my husband's side of the story, and it didn't sound exaggerated, but I didn't want to take sides and sour my relationship with my sister-in-law before it even started. While I nodded along with my husband inside, I was reminding myself to stay neutral. But boy, the sister-in-law I met was nothing like the picture my husband painted. She was something else entirely. After the introductions and self-introductions were done, and we began to dig deeper over dinner with the in-laws, she started talking about her hobbies and was super easy to talk to. Despite the friction with my husband, I felt as a fellow woman we could make it work. She's in her early 30s but seems to see the world through rose-colored glasses, probably due to her carefree lifestyle. Then again, some people don't show their true selves and put on a facade. Was she on guard around me? Or was she playing up the unreliable angle out of consideration? That's what I was thinking. However, as the warm and friendly atmosphere of the gathering reached its later stages, my in-laws formally addressed the start of our family relations with words of encouragement. My mother-in-law, drawing from her experience, mentioned that it's tough to balance work and unfamiliar household chores, so she encouraged us to support each other. Ever since my husband decided to support my career continuation, he confidently assured that he could handle the household chores, having learned the ropes from his mother, who in turn was a bit worried and asked, "Really? If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask." They said, and the meet and greet for our wedding should have ended on a good note. That is, until my sister-in-law, oblivious to the mood, chimed in. Both of you workings means you'll be rolling in dough, right? You'll be saving up for a rainy day, huh? Basically end up single and an old lady. You'll use that savings to take care of me, right? So if I never marry, you guys have got my back, she said. The idea was that we should manage on my husband's salary alone and save my entire paycheck, so that if my sister-in-law never married and became elderly, we would use that money to support her. Ike-mamity. I was stunned. It took me a moment to comprehend what she had said, and I was at a loss for words. My husband instantly got it. Are you kidding me? He snapped back. Why should we care about your retirement when you've chosen to live your life without planning for it? He made it clear that her disrespectful comment was none of our business and firmly put her in her place. The in-laws, too, were too flustered to laugh off such a remark and sent her out of the room, apologizing to us for her rudeness. After this incident, I consciously avoided any interaction with my sister-in-law. I believe everyone is free to choose their own path in life. But who would ask someone they've only met for a few hours to take care of them in their old age? Considering what my husband told me about his sister using his money and wages from his part-time jobs at will, I now felt she was targeting my income. She seemed all too eager to come to us with her hands out, and I couldn't bring myself to like her. She easily trampled over my intention to bridge the gap and get along well. Even if she said it was just a joke to lighten the mood, the atmosphere had already been pleasant, and such a tasteless joke isn't funny. She was just an immature child who couldn't read the room. Even after her outrageous outburst, I arranged to visit my in-laws' home when I knew my sister-in-law would be out. My sister-in-law would be out working part-time, so from the time of our initial meeting until the day of our wedding, I never saw her face again. Till the very end, my husband refused to let his sister attend the wedding. I understood his feelings, as I too didn't want any strange outbursts or behavior at our wedding. However, worried about what she might do if she wasn't invited, I convinced my husband that it would be better to have her there under someone's watchful eye. He reluctantly agreed to my suggestion. Frankly, I was also nervous about what she might do in front of my parents, relatives, and friends. The in-laws said they'd keep a close eye on her, so I had to trust that. But my sister-in-law managed to mess everything up with her outrageous actions. That wasn't just about us anymore. She had created a situation that involved the in-laws and all the relatives. The in-laws, too, were too flustered to laugh off such a remark and sent her out of the room, apologizing to us for her rudeness. After this incident, I consciously avoided any interaction with my sister-in-law. I believe everyone is free to choose their own path in life, but who would ask someone they've only met for a few hours to take care of them in their old age? Considering what my husband told me about his sister using his money and wages from his part-time jobs at will, I now felt she was targeting my income. She seemed all too eager to come to us with her hands out, and it couldn't bring myself to like her. She easily trampled over my intention to bridge the gap and get along well. Even if she said it was just a joke to lighten the mood, the atmosphere had already been absence and such a tasteless joke isn't funny. She was just an immature child who couldn't read the room. Even after her outrageous outburst, I arranged to visit my in-laws' home when I knew my sister-in-law would be out. My sister-in-law would be out working part-time, so from the time of our initial meeting until the day of our wedding, I never saw her face again. Until the very end, my husband refused to let his sister attend the wedding. I understood his feelings, as I too didn't want any strange outbursts or behavior at our wedding. However, worried about what she might do if she pleased what invited, I convinced my husband that it would be better to have her there, under someone's watchful eye. He reluctantly agreed to my suggestion. Frankly, I was also nervous about what she might do in front of my parents, relatives, and friends. The in-laws said they'd keep a close eye on her, so I had to trust that. But my sister-in-law managed to mess everything up with her outrageous actions. It wasn't just about us anymore. She had created a situation that involved the in-laws and all the relatives. After my husband and I arrived at the venue and changed in our respective dressing rooms, he came to mine. He was in a light-colored vest and morning suit, while I wore a white wedding dress that showed off my shoulders and back. That the dress and veil were too long for me to move around on my own. It would be selfish of me to ask him to stay, because I felt lonely, as he had greetings to make with his work colleagues. So I was really happy when he came to my dressing room. The time until the start of the wedding ceremony also served as a solid time filler for me. That meant checking on our beloved cat through the pet camera and getting that warm, fuzzy feeling. When my husband came in, I was just about to look through the camera on my phone. Apparently, he wasn't used to the morning suits he was wearing, and it seemed like that was the least of his concerns. Taking advantage of my husband's kindness, I peeked into the pet camera, but what was displayed was not my beloved cat, but my sister-in-law. We had received a message from my mother-in-law. While we were moving to the venue. The gist of it was that she was going to bring my sister-in-law to the venue now. We had agreed to keep each other's posted, so my sister-in-law wouldn't cause trouble for other guests. My mother-in-law had assured us that since they were driving, there'd be no unsupervised actions, so we were at ease. But what was this all about? I called out to my husband loudly. At that moment, still unaware of the gravity of the situation, my husband naively remarked that I didn't need to shout to be heard. But he was speechless after seeing the live feed from the pet camera. Characteristically, he let out a few expletives. It was clear his anger was too intense to contain. Then he spun on his heel and stormed out of the dressing room. I followed him in a hurry, considering I was likely to trip in my heels, so I kicked them off. He kicked off his heels, even if it looked undignified. He took off the meticulously set veil and boldly lifted the hem of his dress to run. His husband headed straight into the family's waiting room to give the out-of-town family a comfortable place to rest, instead of the usual waiting room. But a room spacious enough for a small banquet had been prepared, thanks to its size. The room came with a large installed screen. That's when he caught up to his husband, the entire family was taken aback, not understanding his actions. He was saying something to his parents, but his anger was so intense that the subject of his sentences was missing. Noticing he had caught up, he asked to borrow his smartphone. As with his phone, he projected the live feed from the pet camera onto the big screen and turned up the volume so everyone in the corner could hear. The screen showed his sister-in-law humming a tune while rummaging around the room. At first, his husband's relatives thought it was some kind of skit, watching her behavior with dismay. There were even some murmurs of exasperation about how she'd always been one to do outrageous things. But the moment his sister-in-law began to rant about his husband to the tune of her humming, the atmosphere in the room turned icy. He's shutting out his own sister. What's up with that guy? One of them said, "Having tea with my sister-in-law isn't such a big deal, right?" Of course, the tabs on my gainfully employed sister-in-law aren't such a big deal, right? One of them said, "Of course, the tabs on my gainfully employed sister-in-law." She also said, "Remember when my brother gave his wife that fancy engagement ring? And sometimes he buys trendy jewelry. I bet that was all for me." Muttered to herself that he shouldn't need the accessories he used to wear when he was single. His sister-in-law meticulously rummaged through his dresser. She even said she'd cash in anything that didn't suit her or looked valuable. He'd given his mother-in-law a spare key so she could play with the cat anytime. Knowing this, his sister-in-law, who'd been banned from their house, took advantage of his mother-in-law's absence during the wedding to sneak in and look for valuables. Upon understanding the situation, his in-laws immediately stood up, their faces pale, and apologized to him. But since when they got to the venue, his sister-in-law excused herself to use the restroom. Regardless of whether his sister-in-law needed to be watched all the way to the restroom, anyone would think that if you bring someone to a venue, they would behave. He and his husband, along with his in-laws, never thought his sister-in-law would do something so drastic as to head to the venue. They assumed they'd be notified when she arrived. Who would have thought that on the very day of her own brother's wedding, she would sneak into their house to commit theft? His in-laws did apologize again, emphasizing that stopping his sister-in-law's actions was the priority. And with that, his father-in-law sprinted out of the waiting room. His mother-in-law followed him. The relatives on his husband's side looked on in shock. The husband's side seemed unable to grasp the situation. Maybe they were struggling to organize their feelings, terrified that a criminal might emerge from the family. Oblivious to the relatives' awareness, my sister-in-law, upon finding branded accessories in my dresser, tried them on, checking herself in the mirror with a satisfied smile and even checking their sale value on her phone. Actually, to be absent, the relatives left in the waiting room began to grumble complaints about my sister-in-law's behavior and their growing distrust towards the in-laws who'd raised her. They questioned the upbringing, suggesting that being a freeloader and single past 30 led to this behavior. Regarding this, I think it's questionable whether my husband should apologize. From the beginning, he doesn't care about the opinions of relatives, and it seems he is thinking about how to make his sister atone for her foolish actions. Hubby could tell he was desperately trying to control his anger as he clenched his fist over and over. I felt anger and disbelief, but I was convinced that my sister-in-law and I were fundamentally different people. Talking to a person like that is just a waste of time. Even if they suffer a setback, they'll just sleep it off and completely forget about it by the next day. They don't learn from their mistakes, nor have any intention of growing. They're nothing but the dregs of society, only capable of thinking about how to get through life the easy way. I swore that even if my husband or in-laws groveled and begged me for forgiveness, I would never let her in. But I doubt my husband would want that anyway. Right about 10 minutes after the in-laws had stormed out, the live video took a dramatic turn. As my sister-in-law was engrossed in her search, my father-in-law lunged into the room. Before she could turn around at the sound of the door swinging open, she was suddenly grabbed from behind, completely taken aback. "What are you doing here in my son and daughter-in-law's home, which you're banned from?" Her face was clearly shaken. Our new home wasn't equipped with security measures. She must have found a way to snoop around without the in-laws' watchful eyes, knowing well enough that my mother-in-law had a spare key. But it looked like she hadn't thought about what would happen if she got caught. She was stumbling over her words, trying to make excuses.
"I was asked by my sister-in-law. Look, I even found the jewelry as proof, right?"
Then, trailing behind, my mother-in-law entered the room. Holding a smartphone, she loudly exclaimed that she had to report the illegal entry to the police. "Why would I ask you, someone who's banned? And why are you wearing the jewelry that you claim she asked for?" My sister-in-law's weak excuses were met with solid arguments from my mother-in-law, and as my sister-in-law looked for a chance to escape, my father-in-law pinned her down with his full weight.
With his full weight, she was complaining that she was in pain and that she would suffocate to death.
But my father-in-law firmly told her that if she had the strength to shout, she wasn't going to die.
Right then, the police arrived, having been notified.
My sister-in-law was taken away as a trespasser, but she kept resisting, repeating, "Just because I entered a family member's home, that's trespassing." She asked, "Are the police here idiots?"
My mother-in-law informed her that all the evidence was there, and that the entire family had seen it happen in real time, revealing the existence of the pet camera. When my sister-in-law saw the bedroom camera, she seemed to admit her defeat and was quietly led away by the police. I breathed a sigh of relief at that sight. Actually, I hadn't thought the in-laws would hand her over to the police, but I was grateful that they imposed a proper sanction. Yet, the fact that the criminal act of a real sister was exposed made it complicated to feel simply happy about it. Even if they hated each other and didn't get along, they were still siblings, and I believed that he must have his own thoughts about it. The whole room on my husband's side was in uproar. Think that a criminal had emerged from the family. Some were disappointed, while others openly expressed their anger as a disgrace to the family. Amidst this, the in-laws who had handed my sister-in-law over to the police returned. Surely, the wedding could not proceed under these circumstances and was, of course, canceled. There were people who had traveled long distances to celebrate with us, and others who had finally managed to clear their schedules to be there. The feelings of regret and a wish for understanding intermingled within me. Semi-in-laws quickly sensed how I felt and repeatedly bowed their heads to us, apologizing for the turn of events. The mother-in-law blamed herself for not keeping a better eye on her daughter, apologizing to us repeatedly. She also stood silently, taking in the furious remarks from the entire family for having brought such a disgrace upon them and kept apologizing endlessly. Having heard that the groom's side was in chaos, my parents, worried, peeked into the room. Seeing the in-laws apologizing to the groom's family, they realized something was seriously wrong and asked me for an explanation. I could say that my sister-in-law had broken into our new home to steal, but I didn't know how much they would believe. Then, noticing my parents were there, my in-laws came over and, without any explanation, apologized to my parents. When the in-laws revealed what their daughter had done, my parents' expressions grew complicated. My husband knew his sister had issues, but he had no idea she was this foolish. Along with his parents, he apologized to mine, despite him being a victim too. But neither my parents nor I could simply say, "Don't worry about it," and a heavy, indescribable silence hung in the air. After gathering their thoughts, my parents decided to take me and my husband back home. My parents said they'd leave future decisions up to us, but they did agree to cancel the wedding, and for the time being, that settled things. Later on, my sister-in-law got off with just a fine because it was her first offense, and she hadn't actually stolen anything. Had she been caught after rifling through the new house, theft would have been added to her charges, and she wouldn't have gotten off with just a fine. My husband bitterly said she should have been arrested for theft and spent some time in jail. I was slightly in agreement, not wanting anything to do with her going forward. Though my sister-in-law got off with a fine, she now had a criminal record, and the in-laws severely scolded her for breaking into someone's house while they were away, even if she was family. My daughter would know right from wrong well past the age of 30. My father-in-law raged to the point I thought his veins might pop, and I heard he disowned her right then and there. She had to pay for all wedding-related expenses, including those incurred from the cancellation. And my sister-in-law, who had blown through all her part-time job earnings, was forced to borrow from every lender out there to cover the costs. Of course, some lenders were reputable, while others were shady, skirting the edges of the law, and now she faced a future of hard work and being hounded by debt collectors. Able to accept this series of events, my sister-in-law took to social media to vent her frustrations and seek validation, but instead, she ignited a firestorm of criticism. Her photo, real name, and criminal record were spread all over the internet, and a search would bring up those details. She later deleted her posts, but someone had saved the logs, and her rants never really disappeared from the internet. Even when she created new social media accounts, she was quickly found out, ensuring that her criminal past would follow her. She was fired from her previous part-time job because having a criminal working there could tarnish the establishment's reputation, and she was let go from other jobs after being outed by coworkers who knew of her infamy. She's currently scraping by, working in physically demanding jobs like construction, barely making her debt payments. It's said that resuming her hobby of traveling abroad is almost impossible now. After all that settled down, we had a small, intimate wedding with just close friends and family. It was a DI wedding with colleagues and friends, but it was filled with love and will be a cherished memory for life. We've adopted a new cat and are spending our happy days surrounded by the kitty and kind-hearted people.